It began with the sound of breaking glass and the smell of rain-soaked roses, the kind that lined the cracked sidewalk outside the west entrance of Langford University's old philosophy building. Julian was late again, 22, restless, and hopelessly unable to organize anything more complex than a breakfast burrito, when he darted into the building to avoid the sudden downpour, arms full of his thesis notes, headphones askew, and an umbrella that hadn't worked since last semester. That's when he bumped her. Or rather, collided. Papers spilled. The ceramic mug she'd been holding shattered on the steps, coffee bleeding into her cream coat, like ink into linen, and her expression didn't change, not at first. That was what stopped him. Not the mess, not the cold drizzle seeping into his hoodie, but the uncanny stillness of her face. She didn't scold him. She didn't curse. She didn't even sigh. She just stared at the puddle of ceramic and caffeine, as if she had seen worse things break, and more irreparably. She was older, early 40s, maybe mid, though something about her posture made her look younger than she ought to be, like a dancer stuck in someone else's body. Not that Julian noticed age first. He noticed hands, voices, scars, the way people carried silence. And hers? Her silence was the loudest thing he'd ever heard. He dropped to his knees and began gathering shards, apologizing, muttering, eyes flicking up just long enough to register the subtle lines around her eyes and mouth. Not harsh lines. Lines like echoes. She said, finally, "You're bleeding." Julian looked down and saw a thin red thread curling down his thumb, already mixing with the rain. "It's nothing," he said too quickly. "You picked up the sharpest piece," she replied, kneeling across from him and brushing a shard off his wrist with the sleeve of her coat. "That's something." He should have said thank you. He should have gotten up, walked away, chalked it up to a bad Monday. But something about the angle of her head, the calculated warmth in her voice, the precise way she distanced herself even while helping, it pulled at him. Not attraction, not yet. Just curiosity. A gravity made of contradiction. Later, he would find out her name was Evelyn Shaw. Adjunct literature professor. Divorced. Lived alone in an old house off Clover Hill Lane, with ivy choking the mailbox and hydrangeas that never seemed to bloom right. Rumor was she'd once taught in New York, maybe had a book published, but that was before she came back. Back from where? No one said. But right then, she was just the woman who said nothing while holding out a paper napkin from her coat pocket. "It's fine," Julian said, taking it anyway. "Really? Sorry again." "It's a mug," she said, looking at the broken remains. It was never about the mug. That line should have ended the scene. Instead, he asked, "Then what was it about?" She didn't answer. She stood, adjusted her coat, and turned toward the stairwell. Only then did he notice the stack of books in her other arm. No titles he recognized, just weight. As she disappeared up the steps, he saw something he hadn't expected, a flicker, a twitch at the edge of her lips that could almost be mistaken for a smirk. Or maybe it wasn't a smile at all, just the muscle memory of one. They didn't meet again for 3 days. It was Thursday evening when Julian passed the staff lounge and saw her sitting alone, a black pen tracing invisible shapes on a yellow legal pad. The lounge was empty. He was just grabbing a vending machine coffee. But he paused. She looked up, caught him mid-glance, and this time she said, "Still bleeding?" "Barely," he replied. "I heal fast." A beat passed. She nodded toward the other chair. "Then sit slow." They didn't talk about anything important. Not then. Just casual observations, faculty quirks, the weird smell in the theology hallway. But the tone? That was different. She didn't perform politeness. She didn't apologize for pauses or use smiley metaphors to ease discomfort. She just was. Imperfect. Present. Alive in a way no one in his own generation seemed to allow themselves to be. There was a confidence in her restraint, a history under her fingernails. And when she laughed, dry, reluctant, like pulling a cork from a dusty bottle, it wasn't flirtatious. It was free. When he asked why she'd come back to Langford, her eyes didn't narrow. They emptied. "To remember what it's like to be ignored," she said, then added, "That came out darker than I meant." He didn't laugh. "No, I get it." She raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" "Maybe not. But I want to." That was when the smile came. Real. Unedited. A thing born of disbelief and unguarded warmth. She covered it quickly, looked away, blamed the clock for her retreat. But the truth was simple. It had been years since anyone had spoken to her like she wasn't broken or brilliant or burdened. Years since someone had looked at her without wanting something in return. As she gathered her things, Julian said, "You don't have to keep disappearing." "I'm not," she said, pausing at the door. "You just haven't asked me to stay yet." And like that, the first line was drawn. Not crossed, not acknowledged, just drawn. Invisible, but undeniable. In another life, it might have ended there. But Julian wasn't interested in leaving things untouched. And Evelyn, for all her caution, wasn't ready to be invisible forever. Their meetings didn't become frequent by design. They grew into each other's days the way ivy grows up old walls, slow, steady, unspoken. Julian started choosing study spots based on where she might walk past. Evelyn began lingering in the staff lounge long after grading was done. Nothing was declared. Everything was felt. He'd bring her peppermint tea. She'd correct his essays without being asked. Their language formed in the margins. It might have gone unnoticed if they'd stayed quiet. But people notice imbalance, especially in places like Langford, where unspoken rules stretch longer than the oak trees lining the quad. Evelyn's name started showing up in conversations Julian wasn't supposed to hear, among grad students, faculty assistants, over beer pong and bad coffee. Words like desperate and past her prime were whispered in the same breath as lucky kid and MILF, as if either label made the equation more acceptable. It didn't. It just made it easier for everyone else to watch without asking questions. Julian told himself it didn't matter. He told himself it would burn out, like every campus scandal did. But the weight of perception was hard to carry when your parents still called every week asking if you were networking with the right people. When your roommates noticed you stopped going to parties. When even your best friend, Mason, gave you that look, the one between disbelief and disappointment, after seeing her name flash across your phone. "Are you seriously screwing a professor?" Mason asked one night, his voice low but hot with judgment. "You know how that looks, right?" "She's not my professor." "That's not the point." Julian didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Because Mason wasn't wrong, just blind. Evelyn had her own demons. A marriage that died quietly, not from betrayal but from disinterest. A teenage son she no longer saw, by his own choice. A career that had stalled when she'd left New York to take care of her mother, only to return years later with no husband, no acclaim, and no idea how to start again. She had seen eyes roll when she spoke in meetings. She had seen her age referenced not in years, but in the distance between who she was and who people thought she should still be. And yet, with Julian, she softened. It started with his hands. He used them when he talked, when he argued, when he listened. It unnerved her at first, this young man with no armor. But it disarmed her too. He didn't see her as older. He saw her as full. And slowly, she let herself become that way again. They didn't label what they were. They met in off-campus bookstores, late diners, bookstores in the next town. She came to one of his late-night poetry readings anonymously and left before he finished. He wrote about grief like it was something beautiful. She loved that. He hated when she called it beautiful. "Grief isn't art," he said once, in the back of her car, parked behind the shuttered bakery 2 blocks from campus. "It is if you survive it," she answered. But that's when it cracked. The illusion. The fragile dome they'd built between reality and want. A week later, Evelyn received a phone call. No ID. A voice that didn't need one. "I don't care what you do in your free time," the voice said, smooth, rehearsed. "But I'd suggest you stay away from Julian Carter. For your sake." The call ended with a click. No name. No threats. Just implication. She didn't tell Julian. Not yet. Instead, she folded into herself. Became more careful. More distant. She stopped answering texts right away. She stopped leaning in during conversations. Julian noticed. He didn't confront it directly. Not at first. Until Thursday. She was waiting at the same cafe, sitting outside despite the cold. He saw her before she saw him. Saw the way her fingers shook slightly, not from temperature, but from doubt. When he sat, he didn't smile. "What happened?" Evelyn exhaled. "I don't know what you mean." He didn't move. "Bullshit." She looked away. "You're young. That's what they'll see first. What they'll say first." "I don't care." "I do." "Why?" he asked, louder than he meant to. "Because of what they think. Or because you're starting to believe them." That landed. Hard. "You think I'm ashamed of you?" she asked, voice low and sharp. "You think I'd risk everything for someone I didn't want?" Julian blinked. Evelyn continued. I got a call. Someone knows. Someone's warning me. They're not threatening you, Julian. They're threatening me. Because I have something to lose. He tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled back. And there it was. The climax wasn't the call itself. It was the space it opened. The silence it forced between them. Two people who had built something real without ever daring to ask, what now? Neither of them had an answer. Nights changed after the phone call. What used to be a sanctuary became a question. Each message between them came with a pause. Each meeting, a risk. And yet, neither walked away. If anything, the shadows brought them closer. They started talking more, but not in public. Not during the day. Their conversations happened in the hours when most of the world had gone quiet, when even doubt seemed to take a breath. Julian would drive out to Clover Hill under the pretense of late library study sessions. Evelyn would meet him at the side door, never turning on the porch light. Inside her house, things looked lived in but untouched. Shelves of books with dust jackets curling like old paper. A lamp near the fireplace that always buzzed faintly. No pictures on the mantel, just a stack of old mail and one chipped wine glass. Julian called it her museum. She called it what's left. One night, they sat on the floor beneath the window, drinking scotch neither of them liked, music playing softly from a dusty Bluetooth speaker. He read a poem aloud, something raw and unfinished, about breathing underwater and not knowing when to come up. She closed her eyes and listened. You write like you're older than you are, she said afterward. You live like you're younger than you admit. She laughed, a dry breath. Don't romanticize me, Julian. I'm not, he said. I'm just watching you come back to life. That made her still. Not defensive, not embarrassed, just still. Like someone who'd been running for years and had only just realized they could stop. That night, they kissed like it was a confession. Not the first time they had kissed, but the first time it meant something. The kiss itself wasn't cinematic. Her teeth grazed his lip, his hand fumbled against her ribcage, but the stillness after it was. A silence thick with knowing. Later, lying beside each other on the narrow couch that creaked every time someone exhaled too hard, Evelyn whispered, I'm not used to being wanted without being needed. Julian ran a thumb along the curve of her palm. Then you've been with the wrong people. She didn't answer, but her grip tightened. They didn't sleep much that night. But peace, in their world, was always temporary. A week later, someone saw them. It wasn't dramatic. No camera flashes or confrontations. Just a presence. A person. A silhouette across the street as they left a gallery opening in Woodmere, a town far enough from Langford that Evelyn had let herself believe they were safe. The gallery had been Julian's idea. An exhibit on decay and repair. Photographs of broken things made beautiful again. She'd smiled, genuinely, walking through those halls. He watched her stand still before a photo of shattered porcelain stitched back together with gold resin. It's called kintsugi, he whispered. The Japanese art of repair. Gold in the cracks, she said. You've got a lot of gold, Evelyn. She kissed him for saying that. But as they stepped outside, as she laughed at something he said, a shape detached from the shadows. A tall figure in a charcoal coat. No camera. No words. Just a long, assessing look. And then he was gone. Evelyn didn't speak for the next 5 minutes. Julian tried to brush it off. Probably someone from the gallery. No. She stopped walking. No one looks at you like that unless they know they shouldn't have seen you. He turned to face her. What are you saying? I'm saying someone saw us. Together. The air grew thick. A cold wind swept through the empty sidewalk. Evelyn's coat flapped open, but she didn't move to close it. Maybe we stop, she said, voice barely audible. Julian laughed once, short, bitter. We already started. She looked up at him, eyes unreadable. Then what do we do now? He wanted to say fight. He wanted to say stay. But he couldn't say either, not yet. So instead, he said what felt most true. I'm not scared of them. I'm scared of losing you. Evelyn nodded, just once. Then we better figure out what this really is. They didn't speak much on the drive back. But that night, when she let him in through the side door again, they didn't undress out of hunger. They undressed like people trying to remember how it felt to belong to something. Anything. Anyone. Outside, wind knocked against the windows. Inside, their bodies moved like prayers, half sure, half hope. No declarations. No guarantees. Just breath and heat and the quiet understanding that even if the world came down tomorrow, they had this night. The warning signs didn't come as thunder. They crept in like humidity before a storm, thick, invisible, clinging to the walls. Evelyn stopped using the front entrance of her building. Julian changed how he signed into the language lab. Their messages lost their rhythm, turning coded, short, sterile. Every interaction became a negotiation between want and risk. And still, neither let go. But secrets always break on the weakest link. It was Mason who found out first, not because Julian told him, and not because someone tipped him off. It happened the worst way it could. He walked into the back room of the campus printers just as Julian was arguing with Evelyn on the phone. The kind of argument that only comes from intimacy. "I can't keep pretending this doesn't matter to me," Julian had said, voice low but raw. "I'm not a secret you bury until it's safe to feel again." Evelyn's voice, on speaker, had trembled more than it cracked. "Then you need to find someone who's allowed to love you in the daylight." Julian was quiet for a second. Then, "But I already found you." Mason stood in the doorway, frozen. The phone call ended. Their eyes met. Everything clicked. Julian said nothing. He didn't need to. "You've got to be kidding me," Mason muttered, shaking his head. "I thought the rumors were garbage. I defended you." "You still can," Julian replied, even though they both knew that wasn't how things worked. By nightfall, it wasn't just Mason. A thread had been pulled. Texts. Subtweets. A girl from Julian's poetry workshop posted a vague but unmistakable message about predatory dynamics. Another student replied, "Langford professors stay doing the most." Evelyn's name wasn't written, but her silhouette was obvious. Still, they might have endured the storm. If not for the conference. Langford's Spring Symposium. A formal, over-decorated annual ordeal where students showcased research and faculty smiled through clunky presentations. Julian was selected to read from his thesis, a scathing, lyrical critique of emotional erasure in digital society. Evelyn was scheduled to moderate a literature panel in the adjoining ballroom. They hadn't planned to interact. They hadn't even spoken in 3 days. But fate loves a fire. Julian stood at the podium, palms sweaty, notes trembling just enough to make him seem vulnerable. The room was full. Parents, professors, alumni, donors. And Evelyn, standing in the back, blending into the wallpaper, but watching him like he was the only flame in a city gone dark. He made it 5 minutes into his talk before going off script. "There's a line," he said slowly, eyes no longer on his notes. "Between what we're told is real and what we feel is real. And if you live long enough pretending the line doesn't matter, you lose something. You stop trusting your own heartbeat." People shifted in their seats. The moderator looked confused. Julian's voice dropped. "I fell in love with someone who reminded me I was still alive. Not because she saved me, but because she didn't try to. She let me see her grief, her silence, her mess. And I knew it was the most honest thing I'd ever touched." The room was dead silent. And Evelyn, she was no longer at the back wall. She had stepped forward, just a little. He looked directly at her now. "I don't need anyone to approve of how I love. I need someone brave enough to stand beside me in it." That was when the head of faculty stood up. And just like that, the curtain tore open. People turned. Whispers exploded. One of the department leads tried to move toward the microphone. Evelyn didn't blink. She stepped forward again. Someone said her name, loud enough for others to hear. Evelyn walked to the stage. Slowly, deliberately, like she had stopped caring how her heels clicked against the floor. She stood beside Julian. "Since we're breaking silences," she said into the mic, "then let's be honest. I never asked to be protected. I only asked to be seen." Her voice didn't tremble. "I know what people think. I know what people say when they think they're speaking truth. But I will not let shame be stitched to something that saved me from disappearing." Gasps. Murmurs. A professor closed their folder too loudly. Julian reached for her hand. She let him. "We'll answer your questions," she said, turning toward the crowd. "But not your gossip. No applause. No music. Just the heavy, living pause between accusation and understanding." She squeezed Julian's hand once. Then they left the stage. Not running. Not hiding. Just walking forward, together, as everyone watched. There's a moment after truth becomes public when time doesn't move forward, it folds. People stop talking, but they don't stop watching. No one says what they really mean, but they all mean something. Julian and Evelyn stepped into that space like they were walking through smoke, half visible, half exiled, trying to pretend the heat didn't sting. Langford didn't explode in scandal, but it did what small institutions do best. It closed its ranks, smoothed over surfaces, and let the dirt settle quietly. Julian wasn't expelled. Evelyn wasn't fired. But her course load was re-evaluated, and his thesis defense was pushed back without explanation. No one said why. They didn't have to. The message had already been delivered. You're not banned, but you're not exactly welcome anymore either. Their late nights stopped. Not out of guilt. Out of exhaustion. They didn't fight. They didn't break up. They just paused. Julian started sleeping through his alarms again. He let unread messages pile up. He skipped poetry night. He avoided Mason, avoided his mother's phone calls, avoided his own reflection. The world had gone on without him, and it wasn't just because of Evelyn. It was because he had believed, for a while, that maybe love could rewrite the rules. And now he wasn't sure what he believed anymore. Evelyn withdrew in quieter ways. She canceled a book club, didn't attend the English faculty luncheon. She turned down a speaking offer in Vermont. Her world, already small, shrank to the size of her living room and a few bookmarked essays. She didn't cry. She didn't rant. She just became still. One night, Julian showed up at her house unannounced. He looked older, or maybe just tired in a deeper way. She opened the door and didn't ask what he wanted. He stepped in, stood in the middle of the room, and said, "Do you regret it?" Evelyn didn't look away. "No." "You hesitated." "I was thinking about how many people would want me to say yes." He nodded. "I would do it again." She crossed her arms. "Even if it ruins things for you." "It didn't ruin me. You lost friends. I found out who they were. You might not get published. Then I'll write for myself. You might never get another chance like this." He looked at her now fully. This was the chance. She didn't speak for a long time. The heater kicked on. The silence filled with the scent of old paper and wine and whatever perfume clung faintly to her scarf. Then she said, quietly, "I'm tired of being afraid. So stop. You make it sound easy." "I don't," he said, "but I make it sound possible." That night, they didn't kiss. They didn't fall into bed. They sat across from each other and said the things they hadn't yet said. She told him about her son, the last message she sent him, the one he never replied to. He told her about the panic attacks he never named, about his father's obsession with legacy, about being told he had potential and feeling like it was a prison. She said she didn't know how to live without control. He said he didn't know how to stop loving someone who made him want to. They didn't make promises. They made space. 2 weeks later, Evelyn resigned. Quietly, she left a letter on the department head's desk. She didn't thank anyone. She just wrote, "Some of us choose peace over pretending." Julian graduated in June. His thesis, delayed and defanged, was passed with minimal ceremony. The applause at the defense felt like an afterthought, but he walked out smiling. Evelyn wasn't there. He thought she might be. He hoped. But when he checked his phone, there was only one message. "You don't need me to stand beside you anymore, but I'll always be behind you. And if the world ever stops making sense again, just knock once." He reread that line 3 times. He didn't reply. He didn't delete it. He drove past her house the next week. The mailbox was empty, the ivy overgrown, the windows dark. She had gone somewhere else. But she wasn't gone. Some things stay even after they leave. That fall, Julian moved to a different city. He took a part-time job at a publishing house. He wrote at night, and he kept a photo on his desk, not of Evelyn, but of the kintsugi vase they'd seen together. Gold lines running through the cracks. He still wasn't sure what their story had been. A mistake? A rescue? A beginning? Maybe it was all of that. Or maybe the story wasn't theirs anymore. Maybe the story was this. 2 people met in a world that didn't want them to. They broke the rules. They broke each other a little, too. But they also remembered how to breathe. They reminded each other that even wreckage has a shape, that some loves aren't forever, but they're still worth everything. And the question that lingered long after? What would you have done